Hi and welcome back to part 4 of the Dana build. It's a gorgeous day outside. I get whinged at by Mrs. Breaker. She says every time I do one of these videos I do a weather check. So from now on you're going to get the weather before every single one. So right now 20 degrees, gorgeous, but I've got my hat on still because I'm inside and I'm welding. Right, what am I doing? So I have been making up this. This is going to be the beginning of the chassis for the truck. At the moment I've just got the end pieces welded on and this piece isn't put in yet. That's just there as a spacer, because what I'm doing is looking at all the suspension parts. I've been doing a lot of fabrication, building things up, making up all the different bits and pieces that I need. Now, how does it all work together? So the way the suspension works is these things. I make these little things up. These are basically, well, you know what these are. These are leaf springs. Now, leaf springs are exactly what they say they are. I think it's, I can't remember now, it's carbon steel that I use, and it's incredibly flexible, and that gives me my leaf spring. But I'll come on to that, how I use that in a minute. Make these little risers. My leaf springs fit in the risers. They kind of just bolt through like that, and then they sit, or they're going to be welded on to the frame like this. And then across those goes my axles. There's one of my axles. Now, I know axles are traditionally round, but mine are square. There's a very good reason why they're square. And I've always done them like this, because they fit perfectly on top of the leaf springs. They don't roll, no issues whatsoever. And the way I put them onto the leaf spring, so that can actually, you know, give me my suspension, is I use these. Now what these are is, I've got little plates, and these little plates, when that's on, clamp this on like that. They clamp that onto there. Now, because I also add a coil spring into this design, what I do, oops, sorry, bashed my microphone there. You can see there's a little welded dome there, and that stops the spring jumping off that, and that sits underneath here. Now this isn't finished yet, because there'll be a bolt up through here, and the idea is this spring can push up onto the leaf spring, so it can add more or less tension to the leaf spring, giving me adjustability. And then the axle, of course, sits on top like that, and then is bolted on. So the whole kind of assembly is quite neat, really, and because it's all bolted together it can be moved around and altered and whatever. Now the wheel is put on with one of these. I've just made these up. They're still a bit warm, and these are basically my axles for my wheels. So the idea is these will just go on like this. And then you can see there how that works. The wheel will then just go straight onto there like that, and that will then give me my turning. There's two, because obviously this one comes out to a little rose joint, which I haven't got them here at the moment, and connects to my second wheel behind it. So there'll be another one of these on here, and they'll basically link together. And the front one is obviously to link into the steerage servo. So because obviously there'll be a bar coming off there, and that'll go into the steering servo. So basically that's how the steering works with these little devices. So the front ones have got the extra piece on them, and then the back ones just are straight to link, because they obviously don't need to be steered by the servo. Only the front one does, because the front one is linked to the back one. So that's where I'm at the moment. What I've got to do now is probably one of the hardest bits, which is actually working out, oops, have to throw everything on the floor, which is working out, oh look, Mrs. Breaker has actually come to the rescue. Whoops. Is working out where everything goes in relation to the wheels, because obviously at the front here I'll have these wheels, and then at the back I've got the dual motors. I've showed you the assembly. I managed to get the whole assembly together now, so I've got you know, I said before I was experimenting with these 3D printed pieces. They're in now, and they seem strong enough. They're not actually tapped and glued in yet, just in case I need to move them. But generally, that will fit onto the frame. Obviously, that'll be raised up on these as well. So these will effectively sit like that, and then the motor assembly will sit on top of those, and that will give me the springs. But I can't work that out yet on the heights until I've done all the front. So it's a little bit, I can't really explain why, it's just a bit more complicated. I've got to do the front first, then I've got to do the back. But yeah, it's under 2 meters. So the actual official proper length on this is 185 centimeters, and it is, with the overhangs, it should work. Now obviously this isn't 185, this is only about 150, because this is just the chassis for the wheel section. Obviously the superstructure will go on top of this. There's an awful lot that's been done, awful lot that's been fabricated, and I've got an awful lot more. So the next step is going to be welding all of these, getting all these lined up, getting these welded into place, in the right place, so that each one has got proper wheel spacing, because I've got to get the proper distances from the wheels, because obviously once these uprights are put in, that's where the wheels are going. So that's the next step, although I think the next step might be a cup of tea. So, you don't drink tea, you drink coffee. Right, looks like I'm making the tea and the coffee. Hi, and welcome back to part... I can't remember which part this is. Look, I tell you what, from now on, I'm just going to say welcome back, because I'm never going to remember. By the time we get to part 30, I'm never going to remember that it's part 30 anyway. So welcome back. I have basically now, can't remember what I showed you last time. I think I showed you kind of all the bits and pieces and the whatever, and I've kind of, it's sort of being mocked up now. Not everything is in place permanently, but basically we have now the chassis, the wheels, so the uprights are all welded in place, so the fixed points between the wheels are now fixed. I can't change that, but obviously the suspension doesn't have the risers put in. I haven't got the springs put in. You've got adjustability, as you can see there. You know, there's quite a lot of spring in these. This is quite good. These aren't fully done yet, these ones, but there's a fair bit there. Got all the linkages set up, so, and obviously that, the way it works is, I can't really put that in at the moment. It goes underneath, not there, but this gives you an idea. That goes to the servo, and then this will simply turn, and when that turns, the wheels move like this. So that's exactly the same design as the original, as the first truck I did, and it works superbly, works really, really well. Wheels have gone on really nicely, actually. I'm really pleased with that. Obviously, there's nothing's set up and greased, and all of this has got to be stripped down and painted, because this is obviously just bare metal at the moment. The motors sit in there really, really nicely. Had a few problems trying to mount the motors, come up with a different method of mounting them. Obviously, these are just in there temporarily to hold the motors in, but I'm really pleased about that, actually. Yeah, I think that's going to be really good. And the springs I'm using, so I've got lots of different springs. I've got old springs like that I was going to use, but I've actually managed to find a set of these that I had. I've used these before. These are, I can't remember what they're called now, but they're springs. But they're really, really good, and they fit perfectly. And then obviously I'll make the adjusters to fit these. So where these go, again, it's hard to see on the camera, but they go kind of under the leaf spring. And then they just add a little bit more. So you've got obviously the bounce of the leaf spring, but then you've got the compression of this spring. And then I can use the adjuster, I make an adjuster to make this, give me some adjustability in the suspension. Now the reason I do that is because obviously a lot of this is, all of it is metal. So I think it's going to be, it's going to have a bit of weight to it, this. It's got a bit of weight to it already. Now there is one problem that I've identified, and I'm not quite sure why this has happened. I've got to work it out, actually. So I know the length, the width and the height of this build, obviously because I know the specifications of the real one. And I've done my measurements right, and everything is right. The space between the wheels visually looks right, and obviously it turns perfectly. Space between the two rear wheels, again, looks right. But the gap here in the middle looks too big. So when you look at a picture of, let me just grab one. When you look at a picture of the Dana, now this is actually, interestingly, is a picture of the new one. This is the Dita. The Dita. So the Dita is the latest incarnation of the Dana concept. Originally, it obviously started off with the 152mm Dana, SPG Dana. Then there was the M2 Dana, and now there is the Dita, which actually the gun is bigger as well. It's 155mm, and I do like the shape of it. I prefer the angular, almost 80s shape of this one to the other one, which was much more rounded, and I was a bit unsure about that. So I'm going to go with the new design, actually. That does mean that it's based on a slightly different chassis. The chassis for this one was the, I think it was the Tatra 817 chassis. Now, that doesn't change the fact that when you look at the picture, obviously this is, you know, the overhangs, the space between this space in the middle is too big. I got a horrible feeling. I mean, luckily none of these cross pieces here, these are just spacers that are put in. They're not welded in yet. But unfortunately, the uprights for the suspension I have welded to the chassis. So this distance at the moment between these two wheels, unfortunately, is fixed. And if I have made it too big, the only solution is going to be to cut the chassis, which is a pain. I mean, I've got enough metal, but it is a pain. Not because it's not difficult, you know, you just cut it and you re-weld it, but you've got to jig everything up and get everything absolutely perfectly lined up. So it is a bit of a, yeah, a bit annoying, but part and parcel of the design, you know, design process that we go through. One thing that did happen, which shocked me a little bit, but I think it might have been my own fault, although we'll keep an eye on this, is this. Now, if you remember, I'm using these. So if you remember, I printed these. I'll bring it close to the camera, you can see. And they are spacers that go inside the wheel. So if I just take one of these front wheels off, you'll see what I'm talking about. These wheels have got these little plastic bearings inside, which eventually I'm going to take out and put a proper bearing in. But that gives me, I think it is a 12mm axle that goes through, which is far better. I'll take that off so you can actually see. It's far better for the front, rather than, say, using a 20mm axle, which might be too heavy. You can see the mechanism and how it all works there. Lots of adjusters in here so I can settle this up. Anyway, on the rear, what I did is I took this out and then I pushed this piece in. Effectively, it was a spacer in the wheel. And it has, obviously, in the centre, I think 17.5mm shaft, which engages on the axle that comes out of the motor. To give it strength, then I put a bolt and a spacer straight through the middle, piece of metal straight through the middle, and bolt it into the axle. Makes it really, really strong. Interestingly, the other day, I hadn't put the pieces of metal and I hadn't bolted it all together because I just hadn't. I came out and I looked and I noticed it had broken. And the 3D printers failed completely. So, and it's failed at the point, interestingly, where I'll just use this little bolt to give you an example, but the shaft from the motor comes out to that point there. So it's broken, it's snapped off at the point where the metal shaft from the motor comes out and the wheel engages. So at that point, I don't know, again, it's hard to see on the camera, but at that point there, it's just, it's snapped. Clearly, while I've been moving it around, I've jolted it, I've bashed it, and it's just put pressure on the wheel, done that, and it snapped it. Now, I'm hoping that it's happened simply because I hadn't put in the metal, I hadn't bolted this onto the shaft. So it's very hard to explain. But basically, I'm just looking for something that I could use to explain it. But effectively, I'm taking a bolt like this, and I'm passing the bolt right the way through this. And then there's a washer here on the top. And then that washer then clamps this whole assembly like that, as you can kind of see there. That clamps that onto that shaft, holds it onto that shaft. So you haven't just got the 3D printed part, you've actually got, there's a metal sleeve inside and a bolt. And when this is all bolted together, really this 3D printed piece just acts as a spacer, because the stress is actually taken on the shaft inside and the bolt. Because I hadn't put this in, I think that's why it snapped, because all the stress of the wheel was taken on that point, and it just snapped. Or at least I'm hoping that is the reason. I've got all these on now, and I've got them all bolted up. So they're all bolted on nice and tightly, and that's, you know, these are the way they're going to be, obviously apart from these pieces here. Once I've got the suspension in, the coils in, I am going to take this out and I'm going to, if you like, stress test it. Drop it a few times, run it over a few things, get some weight on it, get 4 or 5 people standing on it, and see whether these printed pieces fail. I don't think they will. My gut reaction tells me that they won't fail. It was simply because I hadn't bolted them to the axle that they failed. But if they do fail, then obviously I need to go back to the drawing board and I need to look at alternative ways of attaching the wheels to... Interestingly, the first way, I thought, I printed these. Now, this is a lot more complicated, as you can see on the camera. I printed this, designed this, printed this. This, I can't really show you with this one, but it engages into these flanges on the wheel. You can see all these flanges on the wheel. That engages into those flanges. So that will then turn the wheel and engage the wheel. But the idea was to avoid having to drill the wheel and tap it and glue it. This would just be able to come on and off. But interestingly, thinking about it, that's that point there where the metal axle joins the wheel would still be a weak point in terms of a 3D print. I'm still reliant on, you can almost see there, the metal shaft that's going to go through the middle. So anyway, minor problem, but hopefully that's now fixed, because it's all bolted, and I will test that to destruction before I go any further. But right now what is on my mind is looking at these pictures and looking at this gap between the front set of wheels and the rear set of wheels. And at the moment I've got a horrible feeling it's too big. What I might do before I cut the chassis, because once it's cut, before I cut it, what I might do is mock it all up in cardboard, you know, mock the bodywork up in cardboard, see what it looks like on this chassis. And if this gap is acceptable, visually acceptable, because that's what it's really down to, it's down to aesthetics. I'm never going to be 100% accurate with a build like this, and in fact I don't really want to be. You know, there's lots of other things I want to add to this to make it more science fiction than science reality. But there's the practical nature of this gap. Obviously, if this were to go over obstacles, you might find, because the aim of this space here is going to put the battery box in here, it may ground out. And when you look at these designs of these things, they're not going to grind out, because that gap, basically the gap between, well, I've got the original design for, I've got a blueprint actually for a Tatra I've got it somewhere. So I've got some of the blueprints here for the Tatra truck, and interestingly, when you look at this little kind of diagram, the gap there is, yeah, I've made that gap too big. I've made that gap too big. Oh, beep! Not to worry. You just don't like cutting a perfectly good bit of steel when there's nothing wrong with it. And now I've got to go to all the effort of lining it up. I'm going to make the bodywork first, and then sit back with lots of cups of tea and assess. And if I don't think it's right, better to put it right now, because once the bodywork is made, there is nothing I can do about it. Anyway, that is where I am at for this point. Managed to get some more steel as well, actually, which was really good. We had a couple of sculptures that were out in a sculpture park, and one particular one didn't sell. Didn't think it would, actually. Wasn't that good. But it has an awful lot of steel on it, and it had an awful lot of square section, which is what I wanted. But here is a perfect example of the condition I get this steel in. You can see the steel itself is fine, but it's covered in stuff that's glued on it, bits of plastic, bits of rubber. It's just the hours and the hours and the hours that it takes to prep this stuff before I get it to this stage where I can use it. But at the moment, that was a bit loud, sorry. At the moment, I am sticking to my guns, excuse the pun, and I haven't bought any steel at all for the things. Obviously, you know, nuts and bolts, linkages, I bought some of those. In fact, I haven't bought that many because a lot of them I've actually recycled. I don't know whether you can see that bit there. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the camera a minute. So as you can see, this little bit here, these are old shelving pieces of metal. And I used some of those on the original truck that I did, one of the first trucks I did, and they're brilliant because they're really good. And the holes line up perfectly with the holes on the servo, which means that when this mounts under here, because that kind of goes under there, mounts in here, I've got a perfect bracket to hold my steering servo. See you next time.